Pete Carroll was hired today, January 24th, as the Raiders' next head coach. And this was kind of surprising. A person who was a senior analyst with the Seattle Seahawks after they mutually parted ways last year and ended up bringing in Mike McDonald, the former defensive coordinator for the Ravens, which I thought was a fantastic hire last year. Do you like this surprising move from Vegas, bringing Pete Carroll in? It kind of feels like when they randomly hired John Gruden a few years back. Carroll wasn't as far removed from the game, but I don't think Pete Carroll was really on anybody's head coaching search. Am I wrong?
No, you're definitely right there, but I think this was the perfect hire for Las Vegas. And I think this is going to prove why I've been saying that the Las Vegas Raiders head coaching job is the most desirable in football over the New York Giants. And there's a couple reasons. First and foremost, we just watched Brock Bowers have the greatest rookie receiving season arguably ever. Not even arguably. It was the greatest
for
rookie
tight end, no doubt.
Ever, at least for a tight end. If he's in the conversation for our receivers, but certainly for tight end. We can't forget though, they drafted a stud at tight end last year in Mike Mayer, who's missed a couple games, who's had a bit of an injury thing going on. But if you got two really good young tight ends on your team, that's a plus. The Max Crosby prospect. There's two things. Number one, this is certainly a coaching hire to try to show him, the best player on the team now at this point, that you're serious about trying to be competitive. However, if the conversation comes to the point where Max Crosby says, you know what, I appreciate the commitment, but I want to go somewhere else where I can try to win, Max Crosby becomes your most valuable trade asset, more valuable than the 7th overall pick. So you have an opportunity now to trade Max Crosby, who at his best is still one of the 5 best pass rushers in this game, and get a whole bunch of assets back, whether it's good to great players, whether it's a bunch of high quality picks. You have that in your back pocket. And by the way, you have the 7th overall pick in this year's draft, which you need a quarterback, right? If I'm the Raiders, I'm going to do whatever I can to try and go get a Shedeur Sanders or try and go get a Cam Ward. But even if I can't get one of those guys, right? Maybe I pick up the phone and I call Kirk Cousins' agent and I say, hey, would you be willing to come out here for a year or two until we can find our franchise guy? Maybe I pick up the phone and I call Sam Darnold and I say, hey, Sam, would you be willing to come here for a year or two until we can find our franchise guy? Maybe we call Minnesota and see just how serious they are about actually moving off of J.J. McCarthy. And we bring J.J. McCarthy in to Vegas, and then we don't have to worry about drafting someone at the 7th overall pick to be our quarterback. We can use that pick to do something else. Pete Carroll is a guy. We know this from his time at Seattle. Pete Carroll has hit on a lot of key high-quality draft picks, high-quality impact players for that team. DK Metcalf, Abraham Lucas, Nick Cross, I believe, is the offensive lineman that they've drafted.
I think Charles Cross.
Charles Cross, sorry. I'm thinking of
JSN.
Superhero thing. JSN, Kenneth Walker, Tariq Woolen. Like, there's a lot of talent on that team that Pete Carroll had a heavy hand in picking who get their names called during the NFL draft. So if you're a Raiders fan, if you're the Raiders, this is a home run hire for Pete Carroll, because Adam, you're right. I don't even think I saw anybody even mentioning Pete Carroll in any type of potential head coaching vacancies. And there were a lot of them this year. So to have arguably the best head coaching job, and you go out there and get someone like Pete Carroll, a guy who you know is a great coach, another guy who's been to a Super Bowl. He's been to 2 Super Bowls, won one of them. He's a winner in his career. He can have a Jim Harbaugh-like effect on this football team. The same way we saw Harbaugh go to L.A. and kind of pick them up from a little bit of obscurity and mediocrity and get them to the playoffs. Justin Herbert ruined that for him, but they'll be better. Pete Carroll can do the same. I'm not saying the Raiders are going to be a playoff team next year, but they can certainly be a team that we might see in the hunt of the playoffs down the stretch of the season if they can hit on a couple of key areas and make the right decision as it relates to Matt Crosby, whether it's moving off of him and trading him for a bunch back or keeping him and really being committed to fill in a couple of these holes and be competitive. So home run for Pete Carroll to get this job, home run for the Raiders to secure Pete Carroll. And I think the Raiders are going to be one of those teams we have to look out for to be a big riser next season as far as stock, from going from being one of the worst teams in the league to being at worst, at best, a middle of the pack football team next year.
Yeah, I didn't even take any of that into consideration, knowing that you really could move Max Crosby as a big trade asset. I think the Raiders should 100% pick up the phone for Kirk Cousins. I think that would be a great landing spot for him. It feels like like he's been a journeyman, right? A little bit in the league. It feels like that would be his true destination. You've got Brock Bowers. You go out and get some more receiving talent. You help yourself out a little bit with the roster, because outside of Max and Brock, it's a pretty bare roster if you take a look at it, all things considered. I do like the fit for a lot of the same reasons that you said. Pete Carroll is one of these legends, or maybe not legends, but one of these veterans that has been in the NFL. And, when he was a senior analyst last year, or a senior advisor for the Seahawks, I'm sure he did have a good hand in making some great picks for them and just helping out with the organization. Great point on the fact that we know that Pete Carroll is a great drafter as well. A great developer of players as well, whether it's from USC, going to the Seahawks, now landing this job with the Raiders. And you made a lot of great points about it being a pretty solid head coaching job as well. Having that higher pick in the draft, it could really help them out with being able to make more space on this team, building up this roster. And if you just want to talk about a real culture setter, I think you take a prime look at Pete Carroll. I mean, you talk about a man who has very good experience. He is a winner. He's won championships. He's had his team in big moments to get not only into the playoffs, but make playoff runs. I think the Raiders should feel very, very good about this, all things considered. And again, just talk about a left field hire. I mean, for Pete Carroll to come out of the woodworks. And again, like we said before as we got into the topic, I didn't hear of anybody really speaking about him. I didn't even think that Pete Carroll could really be on somebody's radar, but you never count anybody out that's had NFL experience. And, I really want to give a big shout out to the Raiders for them digging this deep, for them actually going into their bag and really figuring out that Pete could be a guy. I think picking up Kirk Cousins would be great. Helping him double up with Brock Bowers. You have to get more talent on that team. I think retaining Max would be great, but you could also use that as kind of a queen in the game of chess in terms of the NFL and really capitalize on that. We kind of went over, is Pete set up for success? You think he is. I think he somewhat is. I think he can really put himself in position to be set up for success, knowing that he does have that kind of NFL guru mind. He is a big time players coach. A lot of players respect him. He is just one of those big locker room guys, kind of like an older Dan Campbell. People want to talk about how great Dan is early on. Let's not forget about how Pete Carroll was when he originally landed his coaching job with the Seahawks and was able to hold that position up until they mutually parted ways, which, we did kind of see it coming. Maybe the game has moved past him, but I think it's going to look great for him to be in the black and silver, for him to be in a state like Nevada, in a city like Las Vegas. So definitely one of the better hires as we've seen this NFL offseason play out. Give me a record prediction, or maybe just kind of a ceiling or floor like you did a couple of topics ago when we were talking about Aaron Glenn with the Jets, now that the Raiders have hired Pete Carroll.
In a reality where Max Crosby is traded and they do well on that trade and like get viable pieces back and they take advantage of it. And they also use their cap space accordingly. I believe they have the second most cap space available in the league right now. Mm-hmm. So that's another piece of it as well. No matter who their quarterback is, whether it's Kirk Cousins or JJ McCarthy, I think the Raiders have a legitimate opportunity to be really competitive. I don't know exactly. Again, similarly with Aaron Glenn and the Jets, I don't know if I can put a number on it yet, because there's some questions and there's a lot of opportunity for Pete Carroll and to change the team that we're thinking about right now in January to the team that we're going to be looking at the end of April after the draft, and even to the team we're going to be looking at by the time the preseason comes around, because there's just a lot of opportunity for Vegas. Second most cap space. Max Crosby, as you mentioned, the queen on the chessboard as far as the trade market is concerned. They have the 7th overall pick. There's so much to love about this team. Yeah. I'm going to say if they ace the offseason the way that I think that they can, this Raiders team might be able to win 10 football games and put themselves in a position to maybe be a playoff team again for the first time since, I believe, was Derek Carr's last season in Vegas when they lost on the road to Cincinnati. There's a lot of opportunity for the.
No,
for
I think that was the final regular season game. I think one and only. Right. I know Derek Carr's only been to one playoff game, and that was a loss there out of the 10 years. He was obviously on that major, I think the Raiders were 9-0. Derek Carr was looking great. Never been the same since he broke his leg. You know what I mean? Never been the same since he broke his leg. I think it was 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. Maybe 17?
That was the 2016 year when he broke his leg. That was his MVP year. The best, and he hasn't been the same since. I think they were in the playoffs. They had won 10 games a couple years ago, and they were in the playoffs, and they lost. Derek Carr threw a pick 6 or something like that to end the game.
Sounds like Derek Carr.
Sounds like Derek Carr,
Sounds like Derek Carr.
But no, it can be a legitimate team next season if they ace the offseason for sure.
Yep. And you really enlightened my perspective here on the Raiders, because I wouldn't even think about them trading away their best player, having a guy like Pete Carroll, knowing that they could pick up the phone for Kirk Cousins, knowing that they have that 7th overall pick, knowing they have the second most cap space. I'll come out and say it right now. This is probably a sleeper team for 2025, 2026 season. Yeah. If they really nail it, like you said, and they get it all right, it could very much be so. When you look at this football team, before you gave me that perspective, I really think that they could be winless in the division based on how things are now. Now, if they pick up the phone for Kirk Cousins, that could be different. I think they lose possibly every away game that they're at, except maybe for the Patriots or the Colts. The only home wins are possibly the Browns, Jags, Titans, Giants, a lot of the bottom feeders of the league. And, you really don't know how that's going to play out. So if things don't really turn it around in the first season, I still think this is a rough, 3 to 5 win football team, maybe 7 to 8 if they're able to get things together. But that roster is really bare. They need a massive overhaul. They need a great offseason. They need whether they want to grab a franchise quarterback again. I think the Kirk Cousins, or even the Sam Darnold window could kind of be nice. Probably leaning away from Sam, just all things considered, because we saw how it unraveled for him in the last game of the season, and then in his first ever playoff game, it was horrible. Versus Kirk, he's been in these situations before. He's had some upsets. He is a veteran, and people have never really doubted Kirk Cousins up until this point of him being with the Falcons. When things fell off and Michael Penix took over. Now Kirk is more than likely going to be released by the time March comes around. They're going to eat that money and really have their franchise quarterback. So yeah, I think this is a 3 to 5 win team at best if the offseason doesn't go the way that it could. Now, again, if they're able to trade that pick, Kirk's able to come into the building, Pete really sets that culture, this could be a 500 team possibly. And then in 2026, I think we're having a lot of great conversations. Also, of course, I missed the fact that, again, they are second in cap space. I think we could be having a lot of underdog conversations about the fact that the Raiders could really turn it around here. There are reports.
Say real quick.
Go ahead. Yeah, you got
it. If they do get a quarterback, whether they trade for JJ or whether they sign Kirk Cousins, that 7th pick then for them, instead of being a search for a franchise quarterback, becomes a search for Brock Bowers' running mate at wide receiver. And whether that's Luther Burden out of Mizzou, whether it's Trey Harris out of Ole Miss, Emeka Egbuka, we just saw him win a national championship at Ohio State. He's coming out and he's arguably
T-Mac also,
one of the greatest receivers Ohio State's ever seen, and he never led the team in receiving yards in any season. Isaiah Bond or Matthew Golden out of Texas. Like, there are a lot of talented receivers that are for sure going to be on the board. It's a Sophie's choice of wide receiver talent at the 7th overall pick for the Raiders. If they can find a quarterback, again, whether that means they go get Sam, they go get Kirk, or they trade for JJ McCarthy. So that's another key piece as well, because now you're talking about bolstering up this offense. I like Alexander Madison. I would like to see the Raiders maybe draft a running back at 7. That's more important.
Hated that they moved off Josh.
Do that. I mean, and hey, again, if someone's desperate enough to trade for Matt Crosby and it's a quality pick, you can get a receiver and a running back out of this. There's a lot to love about the Raiders' job and how good their offseason can be by the time we get to by the beginning of next year.
Yeah, very great points, man. You might have me get my wheels turning about some future Raiders content, because those guys are in a good spot. And, you look into 2026, they've got some great cap space as well. Obviously, the cap is going to go up to about 290. 2027 is going to go up to a little above 300 million at 314. So it's kind of crazy just how much money these teams are going to be able to spend.
Hey, it's AJL here. Appreciate you sticking to the end of the video here on YouTube. You could have chose any other show, but you chose my video, and for that, I'm very grateful. If you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on social media. Hit the bell on the channel so you never miss a post. Check me out on all social media platforms. Right here, you'll find a chance to subscribe to the show, a related video, and a playlist. See you guys in the next one.